This created a ton of buzz this past weekend, and David Reinbacher, I think, represents one of those pieces of the puzzle.
You look back, if they do make the playoffs, he may be that turning point. He took that team and just stabilized things.
Okay, let's talk about Laval catapulting themselves into playoff contention. And on top of that, David Reinbacher coming out with a sensational AHL debut weekend. Lots to talk about today. In fact, so much to talk about today that I can't do it all by myself. And I am happy to welcome back to the channel Patrick Williams. Welcome. We are glad to have you here. In case you don't know Patrick Williams or aren't familiar with his body of work, shame on you, but he has been a standard in hockey journalism for over a decade. He is the AHL writer for NHL.com, as well as the features writer for theAHL.com, and a colleague of mine here at Rocket Sports Media. We're so glad to have you. Welcome back to the channel.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Always fun to be back.
Always good to have you because we, as Rick Stevens likes to call you, you are our AHL guru. Everything that we need to know about what's going on in the AHL, and boy, we've got a lot to talk about today. I mean, let's run through the quick facts. So, and we're going to get to David Reinbacher in just a moment. We're going to set that aside for just a moment because first, Laval did something pretty unexpected this weekend. They had their last 3-in-3 schedule of the season, which is where they play 3 games in 3 consecutive days. They were all on the road. They played on Friday night in Belleville, Saturday night in Belleville, hopped a bus, drove to Toronto, and played on Sunday afternoon in Toronto. A tough schedule for Laval, but they came out and won all 3 of those games. They've had enough struggles this season winning on the road to begin with, and they did it in a 3-in-3. I mean, there wasn't anything else that they possibly could have done better, albeit maybe to not let Belleville get that single overtime point on Friday night. That's probably the only, if you can call that even a bad thing. They did everything they could, and because of all of that, they have now moved past Belleville in the standings. They're now sitting in 5th place, which is the final spot to qualify for that best of 3 play-in round in the postseason. Patrick, this was a weekend that I don't think anybody expected. What were your impressions watching Laval over the course of the weekend and how they performed?
Well, for one, just how much they've tightened up defensively. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Like, I mean, 2 out of the 3 games, they gave up, 27 or fewer shots, right? I mean, and now, granted, Belleville's not an, dynamic, team offensively, but still, they're a team that was desperate as well. And Laval shut them down quite nicely. And then Dobish, Jakub Dobish in net, just, when you did need him, he certainly stood up there. And then again, we're having Kaskasuo as a reliable alternative. He can come in obviously on that 3-game in roughly 42 hours situation. You need that second goalie to come in and reliably deliver, and he did. He came in and handled a really good Toronto team that has been on a pretty good run lately.
Well, even the week prior to that, they had absolutely decimated Laval 7-1, and suddenly it was like 2 completely different teams playing against each other on Sunday.
Yeah, and so now, now you're in a situation now where you have 7 out of your past 8 are wins. You have and this is the thing we've talked about so much, right, in this league, where you have so much head-to-head competition where you can really make some ground, either up or lose ground really quickly, right? So you get the, back-to-back against Belleville this weekend, and then you get them again this weekend at home, right? Those are 4 games in the span of 9 days. So it's just an opportunity where, if you can deliver that knockout, you can make up a lot of ground, because, a week or 2 ago, it wasn't looking all that great for Laval. They were kind of the team just barely hanging on. And now they're kind of sitting quite comfortably. And in between there, you have a game against Utica, another team that's chasing you, where, if you can take that game, that would put you you're already 5 up. That would put you 7 up on Utica. So that would that would leave you in a very comfortable position. And going into that series against Belleville. So Belleville's fading. Utica's kind of been up and down all year, a little bit more down than up. And so, yeah, they've all of a sudden, like the tide has changed very quickly. And now you're more looking at, okay, maybe you can catch Rochester in third place. Maybe you can catch Toronto in fourth place. Like you do give up games in hand, but, Cleveland's kind of stagnated. They're at, second, they're at 76 points, but they're only 8 up now. So things change quickly in this league. I think as we said, and now you obviously you mentioned, bringing in, Reinbacher, so that's in addition to your team. Your goaltending is finally squared away after, that first 2 months of the season where it was pretty dicey.
Well, that's what I was just going to say. This is all in reference to a team who, quite frankly, for all intents and purposes, look like they were going to eliminate themselves from playoff contention as early as December.
Yeah.
And now we're here.
Yeah. I mean, there were some ugly nights there in that first 2 months of the season. I mean, and I think I come back to that game in Hershey, that 7-1 game, where it was like, how bad is this going to get? And then a day or two later, they signed Casper Suo. He comes in, and I think he when you look back, if they do make the playoffs, he may be that turning point for them where, he really he took that team and just stabilized things, like bringing in good, solid veteran presence. And, now you're starting to get healthy. Like, this month you got Bork back, in your lineup. He had been hurt for a while. So, like bit by bit, it's starting to come together for a team that, between the early season struggles and the injuries they were barely above water for a long time.
And as you said, now we have the arrival of David Reinbacher. This created a ton of buzz this past weekend in the Montreal market, not just with the media, but with fans as well. I mean, I think it's indicative of how hungry this market and fan base are for these next big, fingers crossed stars that are going to help take the Montreal Canadiens to the next level in terms of getting back to contending for a Stanley Cup. And David Reinbacher, I think, represents one of those pieces of the puzzle. So he arrives last Friday. I should mention, if any of you happen to miss last week's Rocket Hockey Report, you could check that out right here, where I detail his arrival in Montreal. We hear from him himself a little bit about his comments after his first Laval practice and so forth. So you want to check that out if you happen to miss that. But he made his debut this week. And I even said in that show that I expected, based off of JF Ull's pattern in the past, I expected him to probably not play on Friday night, but then to play on Saturday and Sunday. Well, I think Ull probably had some directive from Kent Hughes in this as well, because he not only played him Friday night, he played him Saturday night, and he played him on Sunday afternoon. There was no grace period for David Reinbacher. Threw him right into the lineup. Of course, he made a big splash with scoring a goal in his first game. Also happened to be the game-tying goal that allowed them to go to overtime, and Logan Mailloux finished it off to get their first win of the weekend. And then he added another assist on Sunday afternoon. Quite frankly, he admitted there were some nerves on Friday particularly, which is understandable. But outside of that, he had a pretty solid weekend and looks like he is kind of mentally ready. I mean, physically, he's a big presence. He looked like he fit in right away, and he looks like he's, mentally really ready to tackle this challenge of coming over to North America and really starting to get ready for something.
Yeah, and I mean, what a way to jump in, like a 3-3. I mean, that surprised me a little bit. I'll admit. I thought, especially with the way players are managed now, I didn't think that would happen. But more power to him. He handled that quite nicely. And then it's not just a 3-3; it's a 3-3 with travel. It's a 3-3 against divisional opponents, two of your biggest rivals, and it's a 3-3 with playoff implications. So this isn't just a casual weekend.
No.
For a 19-year-old, and then you mentioned that all the hype that comes with that, like he's a 5th overall pick, he's a Montreal prospect. I mean, so right off the bat, there are a lot of things there that potentially could be working against him in that sense. So, but I thought he handled it really nicely. Like, he settled in. I think the good thing for him, like, he didn't do too much. I think that's
Yeah.
a trap a lot of players fall into, right? Like, they're young and they're kind of like, like they want to charge out, they want to make a great impression, they want to make the NHL in one night, and they try to do way too much. They try to play way above their game, and inevitably it burns them. And so I thought he just kind of settled in there, and did certainly show what he can do, but he didn't try to play a different style of game, right? Like, he just
Right.
kind of like, here's what I can do, kind of like take it or leave it almost, and like don't try to be Bobby Orr out there. And I thought that's a good sign for him. Like, it shows good maturity, and poise. And I think composure and poise are one of the first things I look for from young defensemen at this level, because it's a league with such a chaotic style that it
Mhm.
really does it can really trip up a lot of young players, especially someone coming over from Europe, where it's a little bit more of a structured game. It's a lot less running around and that kind of thing. And so for someone like that to come in there and show that composure early, I think is really encouraging. Now, we'll see. Like, devil's always in the details in terms of, like, how do you handle the rest of the stretch? You have that little initial adrenaline rush of that first, that first weekend, but now, like, you get into grind. Now you have 3 and 4 coming up this week. You have seems like Belleville's all over the schedule, so, like, there's a lot still to come his way. But for right now, early returns are promising, no question.
I agree. I would agree with that for sure. And yes, it's gonna be, they've got 3 more games this week. He'll make his home Place Bell debut on Friday night, which I'm sure is going to be probably a sold out crowd in Laval both Friday and Saturday, I would imagine. So, if last week was crucial for Laval to perform well, and they knock that out of the park. This week, you touched on this a moment ago, but this week is even more crucial because you're still seeing all divisional opponents on Laval's schedule. They have one more road game in Utica on Wednesday night. Utica is currently at the bottom of the standings in the North Division, but they have had a little bit of a success in the last week or so. And they're always kind of a tricky opponent when it comes to Laval. And then they come home and they face Belleville again 2 more times, who Belleville, now that they've been displaced out of 5th spot by Laval, they have a lot on the line and a lot to play for. And I imagine after losing twice in their own barn, they are going to want to get a little bit of retribution as well. It also depends on whether or not Ottawa sends Angus Crookshank back down, and what kind of reinforcements any of these teams get as well. So
Mhm.
what are your general thoughts in terms of Laval, Utica, and Belleville, and what those 3 teams might do this week?
Yeah. So I mean, Utica's they've been in a fight, for quite some time now, and they're a team where you think that they're starting to turn the corner, and then they have a clunker, right?
Yeah.
And they're a team where even right now I find hard to get a read. Um, you know, they were for a while carrying, like, the 4 goalies. So there's kind of a lot of moving parts with that team. And then Belleville is like a situation where you have your parent club, they're out of contention, so now they're starting to audition players up top. So it
Mhm.
feels like every day there's somebody coming in and out of Belleville, and it's kind of, well, Belleville is kind of like, well, what lineup do we have that night? And
Yeah.
if it happens to settle in as a good lineup, then it's a team that's very dangerous. And then there's other nights where, like, they're just, they just look disorganized. And but then you realize, like, okay, well, these players, like, it's like an airport, these guys coming back and forth. And
Sure.
um, you know but I think ultimately Laval's season comes down to, you have 4 games left against Belleville, including a
Yeah.
home and home to finish it.
Yeah.
Um, you only have one game left this season that's out of division. That's Springfield. It's another team that's in a fight. So you have Cleveland down the stretch, a road trip into there. First time you're going there all season.
Mhm.
Similar situation where, Columbus has like pulled up half the Cleveland roster. But at some point they may send those guys back because they want to, get them ready for the playoffs. So it really depends on what individual NHL teams or parent teams plans are down the stretch. Like, are they really serious about getting their players into the playoffs? If they are, they'll probably, really bolster that lineup. So, but the thing is, like, in the meantime, you can kind of catch teams, when they're a little bit shorthanded, this time of year. So like you tend to see some big swings late March, early April. And then obviously then you have college kids coming in. You have some junior kids start to trickle in. You have like a guy like, Reinbacher coming in. I mean, so like, you can get some real like, turning points,
Mhm.
like it's not like the NHL in that sense, right? Like the NHL, once the NHL deadline is done, pretty much that's what you have. Like the
Right.
NHL, like you look at a roster on March 8th versus April 8th, it can look a lot different. And so that's why, these head-to-head games are so huge. So like, I mean, if you can, let's say, take 2 or 3, especially if 2 of them are against Belleville this week, I mean,
Yeah.
you can deliver a real, like, maybe a knockout to Belleville because
I think it's safe to say, we can expect the unexpected with Laval, as they've kind of shown us all season this year. It's gonna be pins and needles, from here out,
Mhm.
particularly this week in general. And we always appreciate that you're able to come and kind of set the stage for us, with how Laval stacks up against the rest of the league. So once again, Patrick Williams, you can find him on Twitter at @PWilliamsAHL. Be sure to check him out. And thanks so much for being here. We can't wait to have you back on the show again.
Always. And I guess next time will be playoffs are getting going. So one way or another, we'll have an answer what the fate of the Laval Rockets is. So yeah, look forward to it.
Thank you. Excellent. It's already a point where questions around David Reinbacher are certainly being thrown around already. Is he going to even contend for a roster spot with the Montreal Canadiens in the fall? That's a big question. In fact, a lot of our viewers have a lot of questions, and Rick Stevens and Michael Spinella actually took so many of your questions this past week and answered them on the most recent episode of the Canadiens Connection podcast. If you happen to miss it, well, guess what? You can check out this video right here, and I will see you again next time.